you, Florante, for taking the time to be with us today. We know that you played an important role in the early establishment of the center. You were the first full-time Filipino staff member in charge of publications. You led the first, started the first reader in Filipino American Studies.
I'll clarify that. I didn't really lead it. That was really a project out of Kaz Tolentino's class when he was a law student here.
Okay. Well, you were part of it.
I edited some of it, but you know.
Thank you. So I'll be asking you about some of those things, but let's start with your personal and family background. Can you just tell me a little bit about your growing up years, your family life?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, the history of the Filipinos in America all has to do with the migration after the Philippine-American War and coming here and working as laborers primarily. So my grandfather and my grandmother came here in the early 30s, late 20s. And my mom was actually born in San Fernando, so she was an American citizen by birth. And then my uncle was born in Stockton as an American citizen by birth also. He just recently passed away. And that was because my grandparents were labor contractors. They were helping Filipinos find jobs once they got here. And they came from a town called Sinayat, Ilocos Sur. And that's in the northern part of the Philippines, not to be confused with Ilocos Norte, where Marcos is from, but below where Marcos is from. So they're all considered Ilocanos, and there was a heavy recruitment of Filipino workers from that area in the early days. So that's why you find a lot of Ilocanos in Hawaii. And that's why Marcos fled to Hawaii, because he felt more not threatened there by his own regional people. So regionalism has a lot to do with how Filipinos interact with each other. And so even when the Filipinos came here to the United States, they usually separated into regional groups or had regional clubs. And so that's how they gathered together. They were usually families in there because, you know, we're all from the same region. We all have relatives in that region. And so the same thing with my own parents. And my mom was part of the Ilocano Club here in Southern California. And they had a hookup with the Northern California Ilocano Club and a Hawaii Ilocano Club. So when they would have their grand balls each year, they would go to each other's parties. So as a result of that, a lot of our relatives are from the same hometown of Sinayat, and a lot of close family friends are also from the Ilocos region. So this is one of the reasons I met Roy Morales, who was one of my mentors. And that was when I got involved with SIPA, Search to Involve Filipino Americans. My mom said,
Could I ask before you?
Sure.
Like, where were you born, when?
Oh, me. I was born in Los Angeles. My dad was working at the time at Douglas Aircraft in Long Beach, and my mom separated when I was 3. And so there's a whole backstory for those guys too, but that's besides the point. It's, okay, well, maybe I should tell a little bit because it kind of connects. So my dad came here earlier in the late 20s, and he worked from Sinayat to Honolulu via steamship to LA. And then he worked different jobs. He was wanting to go to school. He took some classes at junior college. And the war broke out. On Pearl Harbor Day, he joined the US Navy. And so he was, after the war, he went back to the Philippines, same hometown, Sinayat. And there's 2 different stories to this. Some say he eloped. Some say they went willingly, and my grandmother didn't have her blessings because she thought my mom was too young. And so, but all in all, it all ended up okay. So then they came here to the US. They got divorced when I was 3 because my mom said my dad had been really telling her stories about how rich he was and all this kind of stuff. And really, he was living in a bungalow in Watts with some other guys. And that was how they were all living in those days. They just kind of like pooled their money to live in a house. And so his income at the time that I think they separated was with his first cousin, Pedro Ibanez, who had a pool hall in Watts down the street from where the riots were, before the riots. And that's how they got some income. and then the other guys would go out and work. So they worked the fields of Torrance, and my dad also worked as a domestic worker. He had one story about having gone on a fishing boat with Laurel and Hardy. So I said, oh, that's really interesting. No pictures, but that's what he says. And then, so when my mom got divorced from him, she went to Wilmington and found a house and bought it. Now, where she got the money is, my dad says he took his money, and she says she got it from war reparation payments from the war. But then I asked other relatives, says there was no war reparation payments. So I'm not sure how the story is really. But my mom bought a house in Wilmington. And then she later on remarried. I have 2 brothers and 2 half-sisters from her second marriage. And my stepdad, Jerry Rossi, was in the Korean War. And so they had PX privileges. And so we would take the trip down to Terminal Island, where the commissary was, every once a week or every other week, and load up with food, because during that time there was a lot of recession. And this is how a lot of Filipino families made their way, because they could buy cheap at the commissary. Now, I know that most of the families I knew that were Navy families, they all had a big freezer in the garage. And my worst recollection of that is that, we would buy milk and freeze it. And then we would thaw it out. And then we would use it on cereal, and it was awful. So we would say, I don't want no milk on my cereal anymore. But, that was how we did. And then we had relatives that went into Navy housing up on over by Palos Verdes in San Pedro, and then some in the west side of Long Beach, because this is where all the Navy housing was provided. Yeah, Freeze Elementary in Wilmington. Back in those days, you could walk to school, and then you could ride your bike to school, and it was pretty safe. We would play outside till it got dark. Then we had to all come in, and if they didn't come in, my mom would tell me, since I was the oldest, go get them, go bring them inside the house. Then we got to eat. So I was the second boss, and back in those days, we would get whooped for not paying attention or doing bad things. So we did some bad things before, but it was like, and the worst part was when they told you, go get your slipper or go get your own belt. And this is what they'd use on us, because it's not to use mom's belt, you got to use your belt. So that was it. It wasn't bad, it was good. It taught us some discipline. My mom would go into Tupperware parties. She would try to make some extra income like that, and she would lock us in the room so we wouldn't come out and bother them. And I remember that my brothers and sisters, we all grew up in that neighborhood, and there was also a lot of Filipinos in our neighborhood from Navy families. So we all kind of knew each other. We played in the street together. We knew the Mascalinos, who later became Tolentino. We knew other families in the neighborhood that we, kept ties with throughout the years, even today. And so after that, I went to Wilmington Junior High. I was involved in the band, and then we got to do concerts and stuff like that. And then in high school, I went to Banning High School, and it was, all the time, our neighborhood was pretty mixed. So the schools were pretty mixed. So there was Chicanos, there was African Americans, there were Samoans, there was Filipinos, some Chinese, some Japanese. And in high school, I was part of the Human Relations Club, which was our melting together of our ethnic people. And we went to conferences one time, and I remember going to South High in Torrance and meeting all these folks from other similar clubs on their high school campuses. And this Chicano guy says, oh yeah, we're related, because the Mexicans, Native Americans came across the land bridges from Asia. And so, we're actually related. I said, oh, that's deep. I don't know anything about that. And so this was my first taste of that kind of stuff. I was also in an honor club. We had knights and ladies there. And I was also a little bit privileged, because I was the keyboard player for the choir. So I got out of class a lot. So I would just show them my note that I had to go for rehearsal or for concert or for assembly, because I had to play the keyboards for the chorus. I said, okay, go. And I had one note that I saved that said, "Dear Mrs. Allen, if you don't let Florante, or back in those days, my name was Peter, go, I'll kill myself." So I kept that, and it's still in my scrapbook someplace. But there's just a lot of good memories. I was on the tennis team, and I was also in high school leadership. So we all kind of, on one hand, we weren't like with the lowriders or the other folks that were in school, or the football jocks and stuff like that. So you think about Breakfast Club and the different strata of the kids, and so we were kind of like with the popular kids in leadership, and so it was good. It was a nice time. Had a lot of friends. And then I wanted to go to college, and I wanted to go originally to either Sonoma or to Santa Cruz. So I put out my applications, and I think I was even accepted at Santa Cruz. Told my dad, he said, "You're going to Cal State Dominguez because it's down the street." I said, "Oh, okay." And so I ended up at Cal State Dominguez. And then the Vietnam War protests started coming up at that time. And so I got involved with the anti-war movement there.
What year did you start?
I started there right after high school. So I graduated in '69. And so in '70 and '71, I was at Cal State Dominguez. I was recruited reluctantly because what happened during one of the moratorium assemblies where people were ditching class and coming out for speakers out on the quad. And this is when Cal State Dominguez was not where it is now. It was actually across the street, and it looked like a converted apartment building complex with a quad in the middle. And so that was our campus until they finished building the real side of the campus. And we started an Asian American student association with folks like Carrie Doy and, oh God, I'm blanking on these guys' names now. I see them every once in a while. But anyway, so there was a few of us, and there was one story. One guy said, he had such a craving for Asian food, he drove all the way to Holiday Bowl on Crenshaw to get fried rice, and came back to campus, which is quite a drive. So we started a club. We had a few meetings, and then I also went to one of those moratorium things, and then our campus draft counselor was giving a speech about what was going on in Vietnam, and he was asking for volunteers, and I thought everybody was so gung-ho that they would all volunteer, and here I am, the only one raising my hand. And so he says, "Oh, come on, I got some for you." So he just wanted me to arrange his files for him. And his name was Mike Howard. He was like, I think, one of the first African-American draft counselors at that time. And so we got to, go to high schools and make speeches about not dodging the draft, but how your rights are this and that, and legal ways to look at things. And, if you were the only surviving breadwinner for the family, that could count as a deferment. And so what was interesting is we also had one outreach center at a church in Compton, which he took me to one time, and then kind of freaked me out a little bit because oh, I'm here in the dark in the car waiting for him to come back. And so, but it was okay. And we would go to places like San Pedro High where the principal would come out and scold us about, "Why are you guys doing this? You guys, don't you know this is America and you shouldn't be telling these kids anything?" And then the person I was with who was speaking would say, "This is their legal right to know, and they have to sign up for the draft, so they should know what their rights are." And so that went back and forth a few times. We finally got to speak or not speak. Said, "Well, you can't do it," or "You could do it."
How did you become politicized around it?
At that time, I took one Asian American class, and that was taught by Nadine Hatta, who was later on the president of El Camino and passed away. And she, I guess, inspired me, and I thought, oh, this is pretty cool to take this class. I don't really think there was anything mentioned about Filipinos in it, but it was a breakthrough for me. I don't even remember what book we used. I don't even remember that much about it. I just remember it's on my transcript, so I took it. And so from that, I think, and then also I got involved because of Roy Morales. So Roy Morales was a social worker trained at USC, and one day my mom told me, there's this Ilocano counselor in Wilmington, and I want you to take your sister because she's ditching school too much. And so I took her there, and that's how I met Roy Morales. And we became good friends. He mentored me, and I think he's one of the key people that helped me get involved in stuff. So I think either on my first year of college at Dominguez, he approached me during the 4th of July celebration at the Filipino Community Center in Wilmington and said, you know, we're having a gathering of young Filipinos to go up to this camp called Camp Oak Grove up in San Gabriel Mountains. And we want you to come with us, and we want you to help recruit your relatives. So I got my brothers and sisters, my cousins to go. And in my mind, I thought, oh this is a perfect opportunity to meet some girls. And so what happened was in LA, the majority of the folks living in the Temple Street area at that time were recent immigrants. And in the South Bay, we were mostly Navy families. And so this was really the first time that we got to really know each other, except for our own relatives, to see what are these FOBs doing and who are we to them, and we don't speak the language. And some of them were gangbangers, and they were into drugs and stuff like that, and says, oh, we're goody two-shoes kids down here in the South Bay. So we went up to Oak Grove, they got us on a bus, and apparently this camp was run by the Human Relations Commission of the county, and they had done other retreats like that with other folks, other Asian groups. And so that was our turn. It turns out it was probably an old reform school or something, because it was like a barracks with those kind of cot beds on it. And we were commenting how this one guy who was one of the leadership or the counselors said, what's that white guy telling us what to do? And he turns out he was, he was mestizo, and that was El Mendoza. And so people just commented and stuff, and we had a good time. There was a river that flowed by there, so we got in the water, and we had these trust games where on icebreakers where you would fall backwards and they would catch you, and all this kind of stuff going on. And so this has kind of broke the ice between us. And then some of the political education came out. So do you know what happened in the Philippines? Do you know about the Philippine-American War? And so they brought in speakers, and they also brought in Dan Inosantos, who's a martial arts, there's a word for martial arts, master, guru, and so he came and did the martial arts, and we said, oh, we didn't know there was a Filipino martial arts. And he demonstrated it, and we had another guy, Rodel Rodiz, from the Bay Area, who was very political, from the Philippines, had this accent, and was very left. And so this is our influences at the time. Now the leadership of this camp came from the Filipino Christian Church up in historic Filipino town. They were the ones who were our counselors. And so they were all involved with FACLA, the Filipino American community of LA. And so they were there also, they were like the second generation of the elders that started that thing. And I remember, we would go to these fundraising dances at the Palladium because their queen contests were fundraisers to build the building. So the way you win the queen contest is your family or everybody else buys tickets. And if you buy enough tickets, the one with the most tickets is the winner. Forget about poise, education, or swimsuit or whatever. Who's ever got the most money gets it. And so I had stories about folks that would mortgage their house so their daughter would win. Now, part of the winning is you got a trip to the Philippines. So that's a nice plus, but at the same time, the majority of the money would go towards the building fund. So they finally did build a building at FACLA, and it's still around today. There's a lot of drama around that even today. And there was also a Filipino Community Center in Wilmington, which is where I met Roy Morales the first time. And that was built during the 40s, or late 30s, 40s, by a lot of the folks that were involved in the canneries. So they put their money together for that. And they were able to build what they say was the largest Filipino community center in the United States at the time. And it was pretty big because everybody had their parties there, their weddings, their baptisms, everything was there. And it was a a good place to have stuff because they had a stage already. They had a dance floor that was big. They had chairs and tables that you could put in there. And they had a kitchen, so you could cook the food. And in the back, they had a big patio, so you could also have parties in the back. And I have a picture now of my daughter dancing with my dad when she was very young, and it's like one of my, treasures. That's where I grew up. And then our relatives lived around us pretty much in the same area.
So you had a very rich upbringing in terms of
Yeah,
great influences and mentors and
yeah.
family life,
hmm
school.
Well, the thing about it too was that, and my wife Rosal also talks about this whenever we do our talks, is that, we weren't encouraged to learn the language. It was always the idea that you're going to assimilate and you're going to be American. And that's why you're a cheerleader, or that's why you're on the band, or you're on the football team or the tennis team or whatever, or you're in the honor society or you're in leadership. It's because you don't need to know about the Philippines. You just need to know this is what we eat. And maybe you might learn some folk dances. So this is how you do tinikling and some other dances, and that was it. So my sisters would do tinikling, and then my brothers would hold the bamboo, and then later on we started a band and we backed them up for parties. But that's another story. And then with Roy Morales there, starting SIPA along with other people like Esther Soriano and Paul Mendoza, Paul Pilar, Jeannie Abella, Joe Abella, her husband, Gil Carrillo, and Estela Habal, other folks like that from the Pedro area. That's how we got kind of a core group of Filipino youth together. And at that time, they were looking for funding, and they started getting some. Not enough to get a building, but at least to do funding around drug education and gang prevention. So that's what they tried to do.
Yeah, can you just, so that was the main purpose of SIPA?
At that time, right. So
72?
72, yeah, 72, 73. And we would always still have those yearly, I think they were on Labor Day weekend, I'm not sure, August, summer retreats up in Oak Grove. And so as a result of that, me and my girlfriend at the time, June Cogbill, were part of the leadership of putting those retreats together. So I even have brought some materials here, which are reprints from Roots, done on mimeograph machines, you remember those? And on ditto paper, which always had that smell. But not everybody remembers that kind of stuff before Xeroxing came around. But
Can you talk about how you came to UCLA?
oh yeah. So one of the things that we did was, as we were trying to build this SIPA organization, it was all volunteer. There was nobody paid to do anything. And so Jeannie Abella had this idea, well, since people in the South Bay and LA are so far apart, let's meet halfway. So they got somebody to let them use an old Chevrolet dealership building for our meetings. So we were there one day, and then I think Roy or Jeannie said something about there's this convention, the Filipino Far West Convention, or the Young Filipino People's Far West Convention, that's happening in '71 on Labor Day weekend in Seattle, and we want to send a representative. And so I said, well, I can go. And so we passed the hat around and we collected money for gas. And so we went up in my van, which is what I had at the time, my girlfriend, and then another gentleman called Alan Waltz. And so we went up, we drove all the way up to Seattle, and then when we were there, we didn't have any more money. So we couldn't really stay in the dorms like everybody else was supposed to be staying. So we asked the Cordova family if we could camp out on their lawn. So we brought a tent, sleeping bags, and we camped out on their lawn. And that's how we went to our first conference. And because I came from LA and I was so young, they asked me to participate in a press conference for the convention. And this is where I met Lariat Leong and one of the Tamayo sisters, I forget what her name was, and Rodell was there too, and I think that was it. So I was the 19-year-old from Los Angeles. They messed up my name when they said it, and then they corrected it. This is Peter Ibanez, and Ibanez, and he's from Los Angeles. And so, what are you guys doing down there? So I would tell them about SEPA, and we're trying to do, because I followed up other speakers. I was trying to do the same kinds of things like they're doing in Stockton, about trying to get the community together. But there's a lot of diversity because of and I have a recording of that too, so I can give you that. It's got some overlapping songs by Joan Baez on it, but that's because cassette tape was pretty funny in those days. So that was my Far West convention. I met Philip Veracruz there. And this is all because of Roy Morales. He introduced us to everybody. And then I got my taste of other people from the left. So there was the Kalayan Collective from San Francisco Bay Area. And they came up, and I even think they had their first newspaper out at that time. And they were distributing it. It was talking about imperialism and the role of the U.S. in the Philippines, and also against the war in Vietnam. And so that was going on. And at the same time, when I came back to LA, I met up with folks like Warren Furatani and folks that were in VC through UCLA connections and also out in the community, because they were also involved in groups in the community. And so we were all kind of doing the same kind of things, trying to get our own youth groups together, basically. We would throw dances together. There was a dance we threw at Cal State Long Beach with the PAC, which is the Filipino American Coalition, and SEPA, and then my band, which was Winfield Summit, played, as well as Barcada. And then there was a light show with those, psychedelic lights with all the stuff flying around in it. That was done by Steve Tatsukawa. So that was everybody. We were all there, and we called it Let's Boogie. And I don't know if we made much money, but we had a lot of fun. And those, yeah, as a keyboard player back in the day. So that was our life at the time. And so at the same time I was gigging, I was also doing community work and attending FACLA meetings where we were always referred to the youth. You guys are the youth. And we'd get tired of the meetings because all they would do is argue about the treasurer's report. It's always the treasurer's report that would question everything, and they'd start yelling, and people would start saying, I'm going to sue the club and this and that. So it's it was pretty time consuming. So we just had our own dances and tried to deal money with that and use that for our own activities. One of those years, we actually got involved with the Neighborhood Youth Corps, and that's when we were able to hire ourselves as supervisors for youth and hire them as youth workers. Now, we did it under the pretext that we were going to be doing community service work, and in reality, we're using it as educational forums. So we would have the youth there, and we'd have them like a summer school per se, at our either the FACLA or at another place that was right on Beverly and Union, and that was Pakakaisa, PYC, Pakakaisa. And they had painted the whole front of the building with the big Filipino flag, basically. And you would open the doors and go inside, and people would be just kind of hanging out. And I'm not sure what they were doing, but there was also some drugs going on in there. So people were always concerned about, there's not supposed to be any drugs in here. And had a couple of good people OD that summer, and it was pretty sad. So I was in charge of site monitor for other places like in the South Bay, because when I was here at UCLA, we also started Samahang Filipino. And I was working at the Asian American Studies Center as the coordinator for resource development. So it sounded fancy. What it meant was I was the one to take orders and distribute and box up routes to different campuses on the U.S., because that was the only thing that was around, Roots and Asian American Reader. There was no other real textbook around that was comprehensive, and it was really just a reader, an anthology, but it was really very well used and could still be used today probably for a lot of the old stuff. And
Did you come to get
the job, somehow I got word that there was a job here. I didn't know what it was for at UCLA, and this is between me trying to go to school at Dominguez and be involved in the anti-war movement and do the draft counseling at the same time. So I was actually, I'm not sure, somebody must have told me from SIPA that this opening is up and do you want to go and apply because they're looking for a Filipino. So I said, oh, sure, I can do that. And so I told them I have gone to the Far West Convention, I'm involved in SIPA, I know people in the community, I know Roy Morales, I know Al Mendoza, and I got the job. Now I'm not sure how I got funded because I think it may have been from external money that paid for the job in the initial stage and then they picked me up. And so I worked under Amy Tuchiki and gosh, she's gonna beat me up. The wife of I'm too old for this stuff. The one of the founders of our local KDP chapter, Russell Valparaiso's wife was, well, anyway, the wife was, she's up in the Bay Area now, and she's doing health. No, she's Japanese American. Sherry Hirota. So Sherry Hirota was partnered with Amy, and they were my boss. So they supervised me. And then during that time, what was interesting is they were talking about collectivizing salaries and making equal pay for everybody. And I said, sounds good to me, because I don't make that much. But then I don't know how it came about or what the outcome was, because I never saw that really happen. But I guess it was a discussion that was going on in the center. And then at the time too, I had this in the back of my mind that was I the token Filipino here? Because everybody else is Japanese Chinese. And so it was just in the back of my mind, but I later on understood that, you know, they valued my input and they saw me as a real liaison to the community. So it's okay, I can work here.
So did your role at the center evolve over time?
It was first the roots, because they needed somebody to box them up, take the orders, and send them out. And so that's what I did pretty much all day. And then later on, they had some discussions with the early filmmakers that had film or shot them here at UCLA or whatever. So this is all 16 millimeter. And before there was a VC, I was the distribution for those films. So we would rent them out to campuses. So Eddie Wong's film, Wong Sing Sang, and Cruisin' J-Town, and the one about the gardener. I forgot the names of all these things. But these are the films that I would put in those big boxes with the straps on them and stamp them up and take them out to get shipped out. And hopefully get back in time, or call them up to, you know, we need the film back because somebody else wants it. But yeah, that was before DVD and streaming and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, so that was my job. And then later on, I did help Emma when she was trying to edit the follow-up to Roots, which was Counterpoints. So she asked me to look at some stuff there, and I helped with that. But that was pretty much my role here. And that that came about after I had left. So I knew about it because during the time I was here, I knew Jennifer Mascalino from our neighborhood in the South Bay, Navy families. And we didn't know who Kaz Tolentino was, but we knew he was one of the heads of a tutorial project. So we decided that maybe we should go talk to him about forming a Filipino club, because somebody said you should talk to him. So we went up and he would give us all his resources. So we had jugs of stuff to go on trips, and we would recruit students. But the first thing was a big potluck. So we had potluck at Ackerman. We advertised it in the Bruin as a little ad. I don't even know if people still have it. I think somebody has it someplace. About, you know, potluck, Filipinos come over and eat. And so as a result, the core club started, and we had folks who lived in the dorm says, I see you in the elevator all the time. I didn't know you're Filipino. And he says, yeah, because you don't talk to people in the elevator. You just ride up and down. And so that was the beginning. And then we had lumpia sales. And then the big push for us was they had a thing called Mardi Gras. I don't know if they still have Mardi Gras. So it was a big fundraiser for Unicamp back then. And Unicamp was how they were taking disadvantaged youth from the disadvantaged areas and bringing them up to Arrowhead, to the camp, for a week, I guess. And during the summer, this was their relief. So we had kind of an interesting talk with one of the leaders, who was Lillian Tamoria at the time, about, you bring these kids up to camp, and you show them all these great things, and then you bring them back and you leave them alone. What do you do afterwards? Nothing. And so we were arguing to the point of like, why is it happening? Is that really what you should be doing them, giving them a taste of something just to take it away? So that was our little mix at the time, and that's how we got to know Lillian. So we got our core group together, and then during Mardi Gras, we decided we're going to have a booth, and we're going to sell lumpia. So it was such a hit that when the Chicano group was selling taquitos, when they ran out, they came over to us, because we had a bunch. Can we take some of your lumpia and sell them as taquitos? And we said, whatever, it's fine with us, just give us our money. And so that's how it got, we got an award for best booth, decorated in banana leaves. And then we also had there was a parade of the different frats and all these guys, all these people that were involved in it. And we had a guy dress up as a chicken. And it was a homemade job, so it wasn't like out there in Kentucky Fried or anything like that. And so we won for best costume because people thought he was Big Bird. But we won. And so we had those trophies someplace. I think Kaz and Jennifer, I hope, are holding on to them. But that was our first foray into getting more exposure, and we did. 10 years later on, after I left, because I got recruited by these two guys from Delano to go to UC Irvine. They said, we have an EOP program there. We can give you funding. We can take you there, and you can go to school. I said, okay, I need to finish school, because what had happened with my draft counseling was that my grades were shot, and somebody had told us this story that you don't have to go to class. You're all going to get A's because the professors are going to all give you A's. So I didn't go to class. And so I had like D's and F's that semester or that quarter. And so when I went to UCI, he said, well, we'll let you in under special action. And so these are reserved for like friends of the chancellor and the athletes and stuff like that. Those extra slots that they have to let people in. And so I was part of special action for EOP. And then I worked as a work-study student with EOP, and that's how I got started over at UC Irvine. And then there we started the Kababayan Club. So I have two hats to wear, co-founder at Samahang Filipino UCLA, as well as Kababayan UC Irvine.
How long were you here at UCLA?
I was here for, I think, 2 years total. I came in towards the end of '71 after Far West Convention, and then I left in '72. That's only 1 year, huh? Maybe '73. Yeah, because I went to school starting '73 at UCI. And we had a going away party for me at my house, and I even brought a map of what the party was for on Ditto. How to get to my house for the party, going away party. So that's kind of that stage. And then I was recruited to the KDP.
Before we go into the KDP, can you talk a little bit more about the founding of Samahang?
Sure.
In terms of what the vision was, what the purpose?
Well, it was really because at the time, we were Filipinos from the South Bay, and we thought, we were hearing about other clubs on other campuses. So we had heard about Samahan at Cal State San Diego, and we heard about whatever the club was called up in Berkeley, PY something. I don't know what their initials were. Everybody had initials. And so we said, well, maybe we should start a club. So Jennifer, Kaz, and myself, and then Jennifer's roommate, Sheila Tabag, who is also from the South Bay that we knew from families. We went up and we wanted to find out, is there already an existing Filipino club on campus? We were told that there used to be a Filipino foreign student club, and this is probably what Enrique was part of at the time. And so I'm not sure how it got mixed up that he was a founder of Samahan, because he was not. So that story has a lot of drama in itself. But anyway, we decided then to have the potluck, and that's how we formed the club. We were basically working off the principle that we should know about our community and our history, our culture, and that we should get together. We should be a group, because there were other groups already here. There was the United Asians, I think, and there was other, probably a Chinese group here as well. And so we wanted, and there was, Black Student Union, I'm not sure what they were here at UCLA, Africanos or whatever, and then La Raza or Chicano students together, whatever they're called. So we wanted to have our own. And so that's what we did. And we were successful in terms of recruitment because people felt that they needed to also have that affinity and be part of something. And had food. That was always the plus. You could always come, there would always be food at meetings.
Were there other activities aside from what in a camp?
Yeah, we actually, one year, we had asked the center through the student community projects, and Ken was the person then to, forgot his, Izumi, yeah. Ken Izumi was the head of it then, about having money to go and start a youth center at the Filipino Community Center in Wilmington on certain days of the week or on weekends. So they said, okay. We asked the leaders at the community center if they would allow us to do that, and they said, okay. So we set up our own phone with a lock on it, and we had our own file cabinet in their office and with a lock on it, and we did like weekly meetings and arts and crafts. One of the guys from Harvard College taught a karate class, and we learned folk dancing through people who knew how to do the folk dancing, and then we held dances there. So that was our activities as the Filipino Youth Center.
Was this related to SIPA at all?
We were connected but not part of SIPA. We were just knowledgeable of each other, and we were, well, some of us were still involved in what they were doing too, but it wasn't like we were part of them. It wasn't like we were a satellite. We were our own folks, because all our folks came basically from UCLA or Harvard College.
So this was kind of a Filipino student
Project.
with
With-
from UCLA and other students.
Right. Yeah. And it didn't last long because it was just too far. Wilmington's all the way down there, and it was hard for people to be consistent. So we'd have some meetings and nobody'd show up. We'd have this whole big building empty with just 5 of us, and we'd say, well, what are we going to do? Well, we have to figure out how we can get people to get involved and stuff. And so it kind of just faded away. They kept telling us, you got to take your phone out of here, and you got to take your file cabinet out of here because we need the space now. I said, okay, so we took it out. It ended up in my garage for a while.
Were there other activities that SIPA got involved in?
SIPA was involved in a lot of, somehow. Well, whenever we heard about a conference, we'd try to participate. So this is when Far West conventions were starting to roll. So they were having every year. At that time, I was already at Irvine. So in 72, the Far West Convention was held in Stockton at Pacific University, I think it's called. And so that year I didn't go, but I convinced some of the folks at Irvine to go in my stead because I couldn't get away or something. I don't remember what the deal was. And they had stories about, all those people up there, all they want to do is party. And they would just go up and down the elevators in the dorms and play bongos in the dorms. And they said it got to the point where we had to they were tennis players. So they had tennis rackets, and they would like arm themselves to go out the dorms and into the elevator and go around so they wouldn't get harassed because there was drunks on the floor of the dorms. So I'm kind of glad I missed that one. That's the only Far West convention I missed, but it was like, that was a bad impression for them, and I had encouraged them to go. So these are the Nessie and Nora Custodio, good friends. Nora passed away. Nessie finally graduated UC Irvine and married a Black Panther who is now a neurosurgeon. We just saw them 2 years ago up in Portland. They have a very good practice, and they've done very well for themselves.
Are there any other memories from your time here at the center that
Well, at the time I got into different bands, and so I was also playing at Baby Lion, which was this nightclub down on Vermont and off of Washington, and so I would come to work and crash because I was like, and then I remember Amy was telling me one time, you know, if you have to take a nap, then do it in the closed room so people don't see you sleeping in there. Okay, so I did take a nap a couple of times, but that was it. And I remember during that time it was anti-war activities going on campus, and so one of those times was when the cops came on campus as well, and so the center had bought a Portapak, which is like early reel-to-reel video recorder and a camera, and they said, well, let's go shoot. So we took it with us, and we ran around the campus and we're shooting stuff. And it was, I don't even know if those tapes are still around anymore. They probably have disintegrated. But we were shooting stuff, and the cops were like going into buildings and things like that. And that was an exciting time. And that's a recollection I remember very vividly. And then, you know, Ghidra was publishing, so that was the newspaper we would read because it was basically UCLA students doing it. And then also Yellow Brotherhood was also doing activities out in the community around drug abuse. And we always knew who those guys were because they had those big motorcycles. And then the Women's Center was up and running, and then also another group in the Crenshaw area called Community was starting up too, and that was our connection with Russell Valparaiso because he was from that group. So that's all during the time I was here. At the time I was also living with my girlfriend, so I was broke all the time and we were paying rent. So we were living in Gardena and I was taking the bus to UCLA. And then I got this really raggedy car for $80. It was a Corvair that smoked. And I bought that for $80, and that's why it was $80, because it was just terrible smoking. And I would drive that around, and that was my car for a while, for at least 6 months. But those are my memories of life here at UCLA. Far West Convention, yeah, steering committee, yeah. So Far West Conventions were, they were a follow-up from the 71, the first one being the Filipino People's Far West Convention in Seattle, organized by Dorothy and Fred Cordova of the FYA, Filipino Youth Activities Incorporated. So what was really cool, I thought, about their group was that they had like a drill team. And the drill team just was happening because it was like Latin percussion, plus these steps, you know, with in Moro dress attire, and they would come marching down. You would hear them coming down the street. So, oh, that's so cool, you know. And I said, oh, I want to do that. And then we were also involved in like folk dancing. So people were trying to learn different folk dances and learn from each other. And so at these Far West conventions, these became the annual reunions for a lot of people active in the community and students. So we would always try to have them on campuses or whatever was cheap. So 71 was Seattle, 72 was Stockton, 73 was San Jose, and that's when I brought a contingent of people from LA in my van to San Jose. I had this brilliant idea on the map. It looked like there was this road, shortcut. So we took it, and it was like going up and turned into gravel later on. And then it finally came into San Jose, and then we finally got there. But San Jose was held at the San Jose Convention Center. And this is where I met my wife, at the Far West Convention. And so if I hadn't been involved, I would have never met her. So from that, I got a connection to San Diego because she was from San Diego. She was involved in Samahan over there, and Andres Bonifacio chapter, ABC. And they had kind of their own network, too, of Filipino clubs on campuses. So there was Pakakaisa at Southwestern. There was UCSD, but they were the United Asians or whatever it was called. That was. And then there were the folks over at San Diego State. And one of the key players there was Sal Flor, because he was their EOP recruiter. And what this kind of made them distinct is they also had a Guamanian center there too, or a Guamanian club that was also operating on campus. And so they were always working together. So it was like the Chamorros and the Filipinos would throw joint things together and have activities together. And so I got to know them because I was dating. And I would be down there every weekend. And this is when the first gas crisis started. So this is when they had to buy gas on odd, even days. So if your license plate was odd, then that was your day. If your license plate ended in an even number, then that was your day to buy gas. And then, so Rose had access to the commissary, because the Navy family, so we'd buy gas over there. It was cheaper. And I would make the trip in my van back and forth to San Diego to see her every weekend. And then I made this one mistake, well, not mistake, something was wrong with my truck. And so I said, well, I could take the train. Somebody said, take the train. I said, okay. So I said, well, how am I gonna get to the train station in Irvine? Because I was attending Irvine. And they said, well, get a cab. I said, I never did that before. I'll get a cab. So the cab ride cost me as much as the train ride, which was like, I don't know, like $20 or $25. And I said, oh, gee, that was an expensive train ride to San Diego. But, we dated for about a year. And then in '74, we had the Far West Convention here at UCLA. And we delayed our wedding a week so that we could make sure that the Far West Convention went on time and was okay. So the following week we got married. And at that Far West Convention in '74 was the controversial walkout of the KDP. So in '73, when Rose and I first met, we were also approached by folks in the KDP to join their organization. And we didn't know much about it, so they gave us a founding Congress document. And it's imperialism this, and Marcos dictatorship that, and all this stuff. And so we took it, we read it, and then later on, Russell Valparaiso and another guy, Amado David, approached us, and Jaime Guiaga from the LA chapter to join the LA chapter. And then Rose in San Diego was approached by Paul Bagnus and other folks in San Diego to join the San Diego chapter of KDP. So she joined them, and I joined the LA chapter. And so when we got married, it was an organizational marriage. So we called it a people's wedding, which I took the lead from Russell Valparaiso's wedding with Sherry Hirota. And at their wedding, they had this cake, which was like the old man the foolish old man who tore down mountains or something like that. And so I said, oh, that's pretty cool. So I asked some of the folks in SIPA and HAPPY, which was the Harbor Area Filipino Youth, which was kind of like their own independent group of young women that were in high school that we worked with a lot. And they baked the cake. So they made it into the volcano shape or mountain shape. People thought it was a volcano. And the story is about the foolish old man who moved mountains. And so it was from a Mao, not a proverb, but a story. And so that was our wedding cake. Plus, the parents insisted on a regular wedding cake. And then we put on the wedding was being put on our invitations, which we printed in Tijuana because it's cheaper, was being put on by both KDP chapters. And it was also a potluck. So bring food. And then our parents were so upset that, you can't ask people to bring food to a wedding. It's like ridiculous. And so they said, we're going to buy all this stuff. It says, okay, well, people are all going to bring some stuff anyway. So I have pictures of Russell and another comrade from the KDP in the kitchen at this other union hall, which was the Muralista. It was a union hall with a Spanish name to it. And so in the background on the wall is painted like palm trees and stuff. And these are captured in some of the photographs. So it's like, oh, it's like we're in the Philippines. And they had a kitchen and they're in their aprons making food and cutting up stuff. And we had a lechon and the whole thing. At that time, I was playing with a band that was doing club work at a club in Gardena, one of the card clubs. And the band I was with, said, well, we'll play for the wedding, but you got to play. So I had to play for my own wedding. And not the whole time, but at least part of the time. We also had a big KDP banner on the back of the stage. And we had Joanne Miyamoto and Warren Furutani sing at our wedding. And so it was pretty special. It was good. And we had our bar outside in the van, because one of my uncles was pouring drinks out there in the van, right? And it was a good time.
And it was at that community center?
No, it wasn't the Filipino Community Center. It was a Muralista something union hall in Wilmington also. But it was a KDP wedding. And one of the things that people also remember is that, you go, here comes the bride coming in. But then on the exit, we were playing Ang Masa. And so that was a song to go out with the masses, one of the Tagalog revolutionary songs for the Philippines. And
Can you talk a little bit more about KDP, the organization?
Sure. So the KDP stands for Katipunan ng mga Demokratikong Filipino, which is the KDP, or Union of Democratic Filipinos. It started in '73 with a grouping of mainly younger Filipino Americans and expatriates from the Philippines who were escaping martial law or had prices on their head or were being searched by the Marcos dictatorship for elimination. And so they had already formed small study groups. We were in a small study group here in LA with Jaime Giaga and Esther Soriano. And these were all studying basically mimeographed copies of not the Red Book, but of PSR, Philippine Society and Revolution by Amado Guerrero. And so that is our textbook guide of revolution. And it talked about the class situation in the Philippines and borrowing a lot from Mao Zedong thought and the Vietnam War about surrounding the cities from the countryside. So that was the NPA's line in the National Democratic Front in the Philippines, guiding the work of the KDP in many ways. NPA, New People's Army, which was the armed arm of the Communist Party of the Philippines, the CPP, which was not to be confused with the PKP or the Partido Comunista Filipinas, that was run by Taruk. Because Taruk later on became an ally or mouthpiece for Ferdinand Marcos. And so people dismissed the old party and were embracing the new party, the Reformed Party. And so the new party was led by Amado Guerrero, and it was pretty strong. This was Marcos' excuse to declare martial law in '72. And so with that, political prisoners were rounded up, as well as liberal politicians, Nino Aquino and other folks. Some fled to the U.S., some were arrested and imprisoned. We have friends that were arrested and tortured. So the KDP came out first from the initial formation of the NCR-CLP, National Committee for the Restoration of Civil Liberties in the Philippines, which was a broader-based, quick reaction to the martial law. Now, prior to martial law being declared, there was actually a leakage of a blacklist put on by the consulate here in LA, who thought, there should not be any martial law. So I'm going to expose this thing going on.
So you were talking about KDP, what it represented,
Yeah.
its origins, and then its
Yeah, the dictatorship. So there was a blacklist that was actually published before martial law was declared. And on that blacklist, released by consulate, I think his name was Balyao, here in LA, it listed, among other people, myself and folks that were prominent in the community who had nothing to do with the Philippines, but were just involved in the community. So, you know, we just assumed then it was like Marcos agents came here, looked around, saw who was going to meetings, and figured that these are probably going to be the troublemakers in the future. So the thing about the blacklist was that you were not supposed to be able to go to the Philippines because you're on the blacklist. And I had never been to the Philippines, and I hadn't really thought about ever going to the Philippines at the time. And so there was even a couple of folks that had passed already. They were on the list. So they weren't very accurate in their taking names and writing them down.
What year was the blacklist?
The blacklist was just, I think, a few months before martial law was declared, so it was in '72. And so right when it came out, then actually from the blacklist, the NCRCLP started, and then martial law was declared, if I remember the chronological order. And then the KDP started in '73. There were other groups that were opposing martial law, more of the liberal, democratic socialist groups, and like Mangapos's group, the MFP, a Movement for Free Philippines, and then there was another group that started up in DC, which actually was a kind of an outgrowth of folks from the KDP, Friends of the Filipino People, and their work was mainly around lobbying work with Congress, around cutting off federal and military aid to the Marcos dictatorship. So that was how their work was centered. A lot of our activities had to do with, like, during Christmas, we would do Christmas caroling for political prisoners, fundraising, and so we would do educationals as we did Christmas caroling at people's houses, and we'd ask for money, and this is the money was going to go for. And we had things that political prisoners made in the prisons that we would offer as a token of thanks. So there was like necklaces, pendants, and there was also like little vases that were distributed as well. So a lot of our work was really also centered around our newspaper, the Ang Katipunan, which was put out fairly regularly, and I believe the center here has a whole set on microfiche. And it was through that interaction with the community that we helped to try and sway the predominant opinion at the time was that Marcos was good, that he was good for the country. You need a strong man to make the country clean. But then overshadowing all the atrocities that were happening, the people missing, just the way that martial dictatorships work. So when people are familiar with, well, we heard about these dictatorships in South America, we were saying it's the same thing. And people didn't believe, well, Filipinos won't do that. They wouldn't do that. And then so you have to bring out these stories and bring speakers. So we actually had detainees who had been prisoners before, who were released, come and speak. We had other folks come, clergy come out and speak, and we had set up forums in the community so people could hear for themselves, what was really going on in the Philippines. And this was our work up until the mid-'80s when the KDP disbanded after martial law after Marcos fled and went to Hawaii. And
so when did the KDP actually disband?
I was trying to find an exact date.
86.
Yeah, it was around '86.
Marcos
Because
started
people,
before that.
there was another formation called the Line of March. And a lot of our leadership started moving into that organization. And as a result, it weakened the KDP, and then also folks kind of like lost a lot of the interest or the focus of the organization. Because the KDP was founded on two goals. The first one being supporting the National Democratic Front in the Philippines, and the second one being to build socialism in the United States. So the part about the Philippines, with the ousting of Marcos, had lost kind of its focus. Also at that time, there was some disagreements with the party in the Philippines and the KDP about the direction the party was going in and how they kind of ignored the electoral politics that were, what had flipped over Marcos and put Cory Aquino in power.
Which party in the Philippines? The KDP had disagreement.
The Communist Party. And so there was ongoing struggle about that. And then
What was the substance of the disagreement?
the disagreement was that the party in the Philippines was not really having the pulse of the people at that time, and they were ignoring that realm of struggle, saying that the only way is through armed struggle. And so their line was NPA, and then the line actually to struggle with us in the US was that you shouldn't have a two-goal program. You should just be focused on the Philippines. And you guys, that's what you should be doing. And so there was a struggle over that as well. So our domestic work around, defending the rights of immigrants, especially nurses, medical field, also, combating any racism that we saw, working on the Baki case, the Weber case, and affirmative action, they thought was a waste of our time, that we shouldn't be doing that. We should be concentrating on just the liberation of the Philippines. And so that was the big struggle. And we did send folks back to the Philippines. In fact, some of that is captured in the recent book that the KD put out, A Time to Rise. And it talks about cadre being sent back to struggle with their leadership, who were pretty much ignored and sent into the countryside. You can go be part of the NPA, and we'll talk to you later. So it was like, you got to prove yourself if you're really revolutionary or not.
What was the relationship between the Communist Party and KDP through that time?
In the beginning, it was a formation that came from the party to try and form a group here in the United States, which was classified as a mass revolutionary organization, meaning that it was relatively a left-leaning organization, studied Mao Zedong thought, Marxist-Leninist thought, and was in line with the Communist Party's PSR, Philippine Society and Revolution, book to how to conduct revolution in the Philippines. And at the same time, built a broad base within it. So it kind of modeled itself after the National Democratic Front in the Philippines, where the left was also surrounded by broader forces. So it wasn't to be just a party here in the United States, but it was supposed to be working for the liberation of the Philippines as kind of an arm. But then when the leadership decided that we would have this two-goal program of supporting socialism as well as supporting the revolution in the Philippines, then that's where the differences came up. And unfortunately, my understanding is that some of those leadership forces that tended to understand our line were some of the ones that that died in this course of struggle. And then later on,
How did they die?
they were part of the NPA, or they were, Later on, there was other rumors of folks being on a list as being, I guess, not faithful to the party in the Philippines, including Walden Bello and other people that were, Walden was part of the KDP, and then after the revolution, after Marcos left, went back to the Philippines to pursue electoral politics. So he was targeted. Some people were targeted for elimination because they were now seen as not allies, but as enemies of the party. So it was really kind of weird.
Congress, right?
Yes, he was a senator.
Yeah, he survived. He wasn't.
Yeah, they didn't get him. But that threat was there. And then some of our comrades here in the United States that were still doing Philippine work really were fearful about, don't put my name on anything, and don't, tell them where I am. And it was like getting really weird because this is coming from the left. And so.
So you didn't discussions come up between KDP and the Line Up March, and where did people find that you needed, what took the decision to merge?
You know, I wasn't that much into Line of March. I was working at that time here on campus as a labor organizer for AFSCME. And I was, this is after I had a job at UC Irvine working for EOP for, this is, maybe 85, 86. And so my recollections are not that great. I just remember that at one point they said, well, you should be part of the labor commission of the LOM. I said, why? Because you're doing labor work. Which, you know, okay, I guess that makes sense. So I said, well, I can't afford to fly up to the Bay Area for the meeting. And I said, oh no, the organization's going to pay for you. I said, oh, okay, then I guess I'm going. So that was my introduction to labor work from the left perspective, in terms of I had never done it organized. I was just doing it as a job. And so I was part of the LOM there. In LA, I was part of the LOM here, but then I was also assigned to do anti-imperialist work. So my work then was working with Central American struggles. I worked with CSPIS and also, what's the other one? FAML, the Nicaraguan struggle. I worked on a campaign to bring over Salvadoran and Nicaraguan labor union leaders to the U.S. and talk to trade unionist organizations.
Can you see what CSPIS is?
Oh,
Something El Salvador.
yeah. It might be in Spanish. I just know it was CSPIS, and they were doing the Salvadorian support work. Mhm. Did I tap something? Committee for something? Intervention?
Anyway, that's.
Yeah, so CSPIS. And we had a really strong ally there who passed away, and I can't recall his name either, but he was, his last name was White. I forgot his first name, but he was really very supportive of our work. We were very supportive of his work. And that was my work as an LOM person. And we also had another grouping called USAIL, United States Anti-Imperialist League, and that was we also had a publication that came out of that, theoretically about anti-imperialist work and supporting the struggles in third world countries at the time.
Remember the name of the publication?
No, I think it was just called USAIL. So about that time, we're getting pretty burned out, and we had kids. So Rose and I said, well, you know, let's just work on the family, and let's just take it. She was actually born while I was still in the KDP in San Diego, so she was born in '77. And then Michaela was born in '88. So they're 10 years apart. And and one of the things that happened while I was in the KDP, which was part of the discipline of the organization, was that after the Far West Convention, which I was the chair of in '77 at UCSD, they felt I was vacillating too much, which means that you are not following the directives. And a job came up for me to go back to Irvine and work full-time as a staff person, not as a work-study person. So I interviewed, and this is when I met Antonio Di Castro. Well, we had already known each other. And then in the interview process, I asked, well, you know, you already have one Filipino working here. Do you need another Filipino to work here? Because you have an African-American, you have a Chicano, you have a Filipino, and do you want another Filipino? So what are my chances of really getting the job, really? And he said, no, that doesn't matter. So I got hired. And Antonio and I are really best friends, but we were friends before that. And so I decided to not take the advice of the organization, which was to transfer me to the Bay Area. They wanted me to do cultural work with Sining Bayan, which was the cultural arm of the KDP. And I said, don't take the job or go to San Francisco. And I'm in the San Diego chapter this time, right? So I said, sorry, I'm taking the job. Because I wanted that stability and I wanted to have a way to provide for my family. And, in the Bay Area, it would be just the same kind of meetings every night of the week and, rehearsals, because it was cultural work, and find a job on your own, basically. So I didn't want to do that. So I was asked to leave the chapter. We had a headquarters in San Diego where we all lived. We lived in collectives to save money and then also to have a base to work out of and have meetings. And so I was asked to leave the collective. And what was funny was our collective at the time, our HQ, was actually the old house that the Estepas had owned before. And we were renting from them. So I was moving out of my in-laws' house. And Rose stayed with the chapter with our baby. And I made the trip at first because some friends took me in that were with the NLG, the National Lawyers Guild, and our friends in San Diego took me in and said, you can stay with us. And I would travel down to Irvine from there because I didn't have another place. And then finally I decided I'd just go back home and live in Carson because it was a shorter commute back to my dad's house. And he said, okay, you can move back, that's not a problem. And then I guess 3 or 4 months later, Rose left the chapter and she joined me. And we took a vacation. We rented an RV, took our baby, and we went to go see Hearst Castle and go to Pismo Beach and take a vacation. And that was our escape from the KDP. Then, after we're both living in LA and we're going to school still at Irvine, no, we're not going to school anymore. We already graduated. I graduated. And so I'm living at home and I'm working at Irvine.
With your daughter.
Yeah, and Rose. Yeah. We have this idea of like, well, we'll remodel a house so it's bigger. So we had the whole back wall, my dad's house. We had the whole back wall torn off while we're nursing a baby, and it's like plastic draping the back of the house to keep the wind out. And my other cousin is the one who's doing the work, right? Because you want to support family, and at the same time, he gave us a good deal. So he's building it, and then anytime we have problems now, Rose says, it's because your cousin doesn't know what he's doing. It's leaking in the roof. It would have leaked anyway. So we're doing that, and then I get approached by Jaime Giaga, and he comes by and says, can you help us with some other work that we're doing? And I said, well, am I part of the KDP? He says, no, you would be just like an ally of the KDP. I said, sure, I can do that. So we're doing Christmas caroling or something else that was pretty lightweight. And then later on, they asked me to join the KDP. And I said yes, and then Rose says, what did you say that for? And then so eventually she joins too. So we're back in the KDP, in the LA chapter, and we're working on different campaigns again, Far West conventions every year, and whatever else we were doing while raising our daughter. And then we had an HQ in LA, so we were living in the HQ in LA, which was over in Echo Park, which on the side actually was shown briefly in the film Training Days. In the background shot. But we're not in it, popping our heads out of the window because we didn't know what was going on. But it's interesting when we see that film. It's, oh, look, there's our house. But we were fortunate. I went back into doing computer support work, worked for a computer store in LA, and that's how we made our money. Rose was working for another, I think at that time, we were living in Carson with my dad, and I was still working in Irvine, and she was working as a secretary, basically, when word processors were the new thing. And so she had a big word processing machine, a Wang or whatever it was. And so that was her work, working for this engineering firm down in Long Beach. And then we got back in the chapter, and then we moved to LA, to the HQ in LA. And I was then trying to decide if I wanted to continue working at Irvine or not. And then this union job came up of working for AFSCME. And so I said, okay, well, I'll do that, because I was still working on the campus, but I was working as a union organizer. And so I was going between UCLA, mostly UCLA, and UCI. So I was working at the hospital, I was organizing nurses. And, because most of them are Filipino. So we would have our literature table set up. And then my daughter was old enough that she could help hand out leaflets. So I put her to work. She would come with me in the morning, and we would go leaflet the employees going into the hospital. And that went on for a few years, and then the union job dried up, and I went back to school for computer programming, and learned here in downtown at Computer Learning Center how to program in COBOL, which was the big deal then. And I had the good fortune to meet one of my brother's friends who was a COBOL programmer in the Bay Area, and I said, so how much money do you make? He goes, oh, it's in the six figures. And I said, and my eyeballs went, 6 figures? I'm doing that. And so I tried to do that, but they don't really pay that much when you start off. And I ended up working, taking a job at a computer store, personal computer store. So they were just, the IBMs were just coming out then as personal computers. And so we were selling IBMs. And I was a service technician. He taught me what to do, how to fix the computers, and I did that. I ran around and did that. And Rose got a job working for Molina as Molina's first, when she came back from the assembly and started as a councilwoman in the first district, which includes now historic Filipino town. So they asked, because she had made a promise to hire a Filipino for her staff. So on the recommendation of Roy Morales and other community leaders, Helen Brown, she hired Rose. And Rose became part of the establishment and worked for Gloria Molina through her years as a councilwoman, and then later on in the county. I forget how many years, maybe like 8, a long time. And then she hopped around in different jobs in the city and in the county sheriff's department. And I hopped around in jobs doing computer support work, and then eventually ending up doing computer support work at Loyola Law School, and then deciding that I would go back to school, because Rose went back to school and she got her MPA at Long Beach. And our deal was always that, well, after she finishes hers, and I shouldn't touch that, after she finishes her MA, then I could go get mine. So I asked her, well, how did you pay for your MA? Because how am I going to pay for mine? So, oh, I maxed out all the credit cards. And then I said, well, what am I supposed to do? Well, you should go get some loans. I said, So I was lucky enough to get some loans and also some scholarships. And on the day I came here, I came over and talked to Don Nakanishi about, what's it look like for me if I get my MA in Asian American Studies? Will I be able to get a job? He says, probably not. So that was really encouraging. And he said, but since you work at the library, we're trying to do this joint program with the library school and Asian American Studies, similar to what they had done with health sciences, public health, I mean, and with social welfare. And I said, oh, that might work. So then I went over and talked to Clara Chu, who was the designated person over there, who's the liaison for over here. And we hit it off right away. So she's become a fine friend and mentor for doing work in the community, and also having the eye of diversity within the library profession as well. So through her, I met other librarians. I got introduced to the APALA, Asian Pacific American Librarians Association, not to be confused with the labor APALA. And eventually I became president, and served on the committee to do a conference, the Joint Conference of Librarians of Color. And the third one of those is coming up next month in New Mexico, so I'll be attending that as well. So my career in that, and then also teaching at Pasadena City College because of a result of my MA in Asian American Studies, is really the trajectory I'm on now, and that's what I've been doing. I'm also still involved in the Filipino American Library as a board member, and we have transferred our holdings over to USC because of some miscommunications and some odd things that happened here at the center, but that's okay. That's all water under the bridge. And so we're preparing that, and we're doing that. I'm also involved in the community still. I'm part of the Carson Historical Commission that's putting on building a historical society for Carson. And I'm also part of LAS Subject, which is a grouping of archivists, small and large, that's here in LA, as was started off by the Getty Museum and continues today.
We heard your CV from the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And you were also part of the LACC.
Oh yeah. That came about through
Can you explain that?
through Mike Ng. When he was on the college board for the LA City Colleges, he asked me to join a new formation at that time. And I consented, and I've attended those meetings as well. So it's a group that meets around the community colleges of Los Angeles with the chancellor. So it's a chancellor's committee. I forgot the whole title. It's a long one, but it's basically for API input. And so far, most of the discussion has been around the PIs, the Pacific Islanders. So we've had meetings at Harbor College, and one of my friends, who's the husband of one of my friend librarians, teaches at Harbor, and he's one of the main proponents of the committee, Christian Lozado.
So you kind of came full circle,
Yeah,
combining
And-
all of your
yeah,
experiences.
yeah. And I still play in a band at church. So it's all there, yeah.
So it seems like your time and your alliance, your affiliation with KDP,
Mm-hmm.
did that, you said that when KDP joined, merged with Line of March,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the Filipino work, community work, kind of
Anticipated. Well, there was a loss of focus, I would say, and then plus, there was no real guidance anymore from the CPP in the Philippines, and so it was like, and a kind of feeling like we're being betrayed, or like we're being shut off or cut out. So we have discussions sometimes where we bring over speakers and so forth that are in line with our thinking more, and we have groupings of students and other folks who still align with the party. We call them Nat Dems, who give folks a hard time, frankly. Like, you can't, block their way to come on campus, or, blast them out in social media, that kind of stuff. And it's kind of like, really, is this how you deal with things, But, we're optimistic that, as we do our work, because, we've always been consistent with what we're doing, that folks who are honest about the work will see what we're up to and will understand.
How do you look at your political work now? Or how would you describe it?
Bernie Sanders supporter, if he ever runs again. It's hard though, because it's a lot of ground to cover, especially now that Trump has kind of really entrenched himself. I mean, he's cutting his own throat. At the same time, people are still loving him. I don't know why, but it's crazy. I had my first class at PCC last night for the new semester. And we talked a little bit about racism and the situation and how it came about and where I showed the film White People that was done by Jose Vargas. And we talked a little bit about that and says, white people have this impression that they're being pushed down, right? That they're losing their privilege, which in a way is kind of true, but instead of that, they should be looking at everybody's privileges going up. And so that's the fear that they have, and that's what props Trump up, because he has a base of support of white folks that feel like they're losing ground.
You may want to go back to some questions around farmers.
Oh yeah.
So do you have any other follow-up on this question?
I think one of the, when you were asking about like individuals that helped form me and put me on the path, Roy Morales for sure.
Yeah, can we hold that?
Okay.
We want to wrap it up with that question.
Oh, okay.
Kind of people, events, and moments. that
Okay.
came to you.
At the end, okay.
But I think you may have a number of questions
Yeah,
about.
just a few.
Mhm.
About the Far West Convention.
Sure.
For the 1974,
The infamous 1974, yeah.
So, I guess maybe if you could just kind of, why is it infamous?
Okay,
Why
I'll walk
did
you through it.
KDP walk out?
Yeah, no, it wasn't us.
Well, you said that earlier.
Oh, it was
Yeah, well, whoever walked
FYA.
out. But what were the tensions around? And what were the good
Okay.
things that came out of it?
Well, I think, oh yeah. So, so the 1974 Far West Convention, before our wedding the next week at UCLA, there was a number of things going on. We were kind of monitoring stuff. On one hand, there was like, we were reports of mattresses being thrown out of dorm windows. And so we had to ask each of the delegations to appoint a leader to take care of your delegation, or you guys are responsible for whatever damage you guys do. So that was one of the things that was going on as the convention, because there's all these parties going on. People are away from home, they're young, they're getting alcohol, and they're partying. And so in the meantime, the KDP is caucusing every morning, like 6 o'clock in the morning we're caucusing and figuring out what we're going to do for the day and how things are going to get done. And are there any problems going on with the conference in general? And so we're caucusing and things are being said and this and that. And then, so one of the things that has marked the Far West Convention is that at the closing plenary, there are resolutions that are presented by each of the committees or the workshops about what they covered and if there's any resolutions of action. So the actions are not that everybody has to go do this. It's more like recommendations, and this is what we found, and this is how we would like folks to start working on it in your own community, if it's relevant. So that's the gist of what the resolutions are supposed to be. So in terms of that final plenary, it's already running overtime. And then people are there in Royce Hall, and they're trying to listen, and somehow a resolution, I think it was on immigration, comes up about, and then some of the language is not very clear or not good enough. And so people are struggling to, wordsmith the language. And so the KDP is, this time has just formed. And the KDP leadership is sitting in one part of the hall, in the auditorium. So everybody kind of looks at them to see what they're going to do. And so they vote for abstention, because we don't want to vote on this because we are not happy with the language. And so the body votes abstention, or the KDP votes abstention. It clearly looks like the KDP is controlling a lot of the voting, which in a sense they are, because we're an organization and we're looking towards our leadership to guide us on how we should vote on this. So after some things get cleared up, it passes. Okay, this is after a lot of back and forth about the language, right? a stupid discussion, frankly. And then at this point, I actually leave because I have to go get ready for the party that night. I have to go set up my speakers and stuff like that. And then so I'm out, and then I hear stories. So the stories I heard were that something else came up, and so at this point, people are very hungry. They want to get out of there. They've been there all day, and they want to go to the party. And so they try to vote on other things, and people are just kind of like, just vote it, just get it over with. And so in disgust, some of the delegates start walking out. And so some of these are the folks who were at the very first FWC. This is folks from the FANS, Filipino American National Historical Society. And notably Fred Cordova, Dorothy Cordova, who has their own entourage that goes out with them. This is all secondhand, but probably true. And so when they leave and walk out because they're disgusted with how this thing is going, then other people said, well, let's just cut it. And then my understanding is I heard that when the KDP leaves, they're singing the International out of the hall. I heard this, and I think it's probably pretty true because it was Bruce Usen who said it, and he's part of KDP leadership. So they leave, and the following week we hear all the repercussions. I'm getting married, and we have a summation meeting at one of the buildings that's off campus that is second story, 2 stories. And so I talked to, we were representing the steering committee. There's Russell Valparaiso, Jaime Giago, myself, Jennifer, and Kaz Tolentino representing the steering committee, as well as, what's his name? One of the Tamayos, I forget which one. Ed? No. Ed Tamayo? He's originally from the Bay Area, but he's down here now. And he had secured a lot of money from the Presbyterian Church for the conference. So we're all there, and then in the course of some yelling about how bad things were, Russell, takes the heat and says, we want to apologize on behalf of the KDP. As a young organization, we didn't really know what we were doing, and if it seemed like we were doing block voting, we apologize for that because we are an organization, and that's why organizations are, they like to vote the same way or see how leadership is doing. So the explanation isn't good enough for the Tamayo, and he says, I'm so mad now I could throw Jaime out the window because there's an open window, and this is a second-story building. And I said, no, and then Cass and Jennifer says, no, they've already said, they're sorry, and so let's just leave it alone. And that's how that meeting goes. And it was a big turning point, one of those stories that will live on in infamy, I'm sure, besides the walkouts. So that's my understanding of what happened in the controversy of the 74 Far West Convention.
Yeah, but just to clarify too, that in 1974 at the Far West Convention, so there was a delegation from Seattle, Dorothy and Fred Cordova.
Right.
The fonts did not exist in
Okay,
1974.
very good. Good point, yeah. Yeah,
It's probably Filipino youth activities.
yeah, FYA.
Yeah.
So,
Was there a difference? I mean, people were arguing over the language, the wordsmithing, but was there a big substantive difference?
I don't think there was. I mean, I think it was probably just, on one hand, if you look in that document, there's also Melinda Paras, who was selected as the keynote speaker. Her verbiage is very left, okay? And so that was the tone and our attitude going into the conference. In fact, a lot of us were told in our caucuses in the morning, when you go into your workshop, make sure you bring up the whole roots of all the problems are US capitalism and imperialism. Any problem? It's US capitalism and imperialism. So, the problem of this, the problem of that is all because of imperialism and US capitalism. So it's kind of like we were hardlining it, And I think that's what happened at the last plenary, that same thing came out. So it was unfortunate, but it was a growing pain. I mean, that's how we look back at the KDP. It was very unfortunate, but what can you do? It's water under the bridge now. And folks have learned to live together. I mean, I'm still good friends, I think, with Dorothy Cordova, and I was a good friend with Fred, I hope, before he passed. And I went there as a librarian when we had a library conference up in Seattle, to the archives at the church, and he says, "I'm going to show you something." And so we go down into the archives, pulls out a folder cabinet, pulls out my folder. Here's my name. Here's stuff that I have in my folder, things that he's picked up along the way, like articles or anything, organizations I've been with. And so he was trying to, his goal was actually, he told us, to have a file on every Filipino in America, which is kind of hard to think could ever happen, but that's what he said.
Why?
He wanted to have a file for historical reasons, for history, archives of all Filipinos. So, it's kind of impossible, but, I guess digitally maybe it could happen, but a lot of people would have to work on it, not just one person or a small group.
A lot of people don't realize the important role that Marxist-Leninist radical left organizations played in not just the movement, but the community organizations and things like that. How would you kind of evaluate the role of KDP in building and sustaining a lot of these mass organizations? I think is what we called them at the time.
Because since we had studied our theory, we would have a Congress every year. And we also have a theoretical school attached to our Congress every year. So this is also how the KDP gelled into an organization that knew everybody by face and name and who your kids were and all that kind of stuff. And so it was really a thing of like we were all of the same mind in a lot of ways. And so we were able to, because I think we did try to organize in an honest and upfront way, we would tell them I'm with the KDP. And, I may look like the youth, but I am with the KDP. And we are here to help build this coalition on whatever. Discrimination, Narciso Perez case, Alona case in Oxnard, Dr. Alona, who was a medical doctor that was being falsely accused of murdering a kid. And so we would send activists into there, into the midst of all this stuff, to try and pull out the facts and try to help boost up the support for these groups. And I think, the Narciso Perez case is probably the best example. And then also our organizing work around International Hotel, when we were also working with other left groups that may have had different political aims, but then we were all working together to try and save the hotel. I think in a lot of ways, that's what gives me hope that even the Nat Dems that are working with us now, or see our work in the community, or see our past work in our history, will understand that we're not the enemy, and we should work together. So I think that's what the KDP carries forward. And I think if folks have a chance to see the book, it shows we were human beings, that we had our lives, and we also put up a lot of sacrifices. Do you want to close it with folks and events? So mentors and folks that have made a big influence on me are Roy Morales and Helen Brown, my parents, we often talk about a lot of good folks that have gone on before us, the shoulders that we stand upon. So Larry Leong and Philibert Cruz, who I had the honor of meeting face to face before. Philip told me, you know, there's an Ibanez in my family, so we might be related. And the same thing Jessica Hagedorn told me, there's an Ibanez in my family too, and we might be related. But it's I mean, that's why we need heroes and role models. So we can learn from the past and also have something to look forward to. Just the things that they did, the sacrifices they gave up. And I think maybe that's what the next generation has to learn, that there is sacrifice. It's not just, you know, let somebody else do it, you know, or it's not my struggle, it's those people. It's Black Lives Matter, that's their problem, not mine. And not understand the wholeness of humanity. Because I think that's the thing about why people say, you know, during those days, there was a flow. This whole society was up in it. If you weren't involved in a movement, then who were you? You were supposed to be involved in a movement if you were part of that. And the anti-war movement, civil rights movement, people who were Panthers, people who were Gray Panthers, young lords, you know, they had a commitment, they had courage. I think that's maybe something that folks have to keep in mind when they see something wrong, like they say in all this, if you see something, say something. Just don't figure out somebody else is going to do it. Not other whole thing about, you know, the Nazis and like, first they took this guy and then I didn't say anything. Then they took this guy and I didn't say anything. And then finally they came for me. So it's true. That stuff will happen sooner or later if we don't stay alert and struggle on.